Houston's acknowledged as the most diverse city in America. How does that reflect in its literary scene?
It's by every metric, according to the Kinder Institute, it's like the most diverse city by population, all kinds of metrics. This is all to say that, Houston's a true polyglot city, and I feel like, that really manifests in the sort of various writing scenes we have here. We have a really strong, Latinx writing scene here, with places like the Inaugural Projects and the Fuente Collective, and among other things. But I also, I really enjoy sort of the way in which those various communities are in conversation with each other. And I feel a lot of that stuff can be sort of, there are certain nodes in the city. The UH Creative Writing Program is one of them, especially the one in Spanish. Also is, Brazos Bookstore, which is sort of like an institution, as sort of an informal hub where a lot of these sort of, it's sort of like an informal contact zone of all these places. And so it's a really inspiring city. I feel like it's a real privilege to sort of write here, but also sort of like, to sort of claim it as my own.
In writing your novel Bang, you really emphasize the importance of human dignity. And I think that's so interesting, considering the fact that it's a book set in such a violent scene of the drug war, the border. How does that real life crisis of narco violence and immigration affect your work?
For me, it was really important to discover, or to sort of, interrogate where dignity comes from. That was sort of like the exercise of Bang, was to see not only where dignity comes from, and I think for every other person, it comes from a different place. I think Sergio Pito said once, the Mexican writer, said that, when you try to, when he tries to write anyway, you try to come to sort of certain concrete assumptions or sort of conclusions about any one thing. What is love? What is death? What happens after one dies? Where does dignity come from? What is dignity? All these big sort of philosophical questions, but then you come to the realization, and he says that all of his novels are like this, that all of it's subjective, right? And for me, Bang was sort of an exercise in doing that. What was it about these characters that made their own particular dignities in conversation with each other, and which ways were those dignities systematically stripped from these people? And so for me, when I write about the drug war right now, or when I'm writing about particularly, migration, in U.S. immigration policy and the drug war, which I think are really inextricably interlinked, I think of the ways in which, the ways in which dignity and the systematic stripping of dignity is a kind of, third violence that we haven't really interrogated in the American psyche, and that's why we can't really, in the American, I guess, political discourse, wrap our minds or come to a sort of certain, argument with teeth about, we can't come to the conclusion about why the systematic, and it is a truth of the U.S. immigration policy that it's broken on purpose, and so for me, Bang is all about interrogating those things through the pathway of dignity.
Absolutely, and I think that writing characters with compassion that may have done terrible things, or may be the product of terrible situations, is so compelling. What are your writing habits? And for any aspiring writers that may come across this video, what advice would you share?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I've never really been able to develop a writing habit, which is like a really
That's
terrible
a relief
thing
to hear.
No, because I feel like it's a real privilege to be able to have that. My life has always been in flux. Really early as a writer, I was never in the same city. I get really bad seasonal affective disorder, and so when I was living in New York, Ithaca was like the second gloomiest, I think, climate zone outside of Seattle.
Oh, wow.
And so it would hit me hard, man. And so I would always drive 4 hours, to New York or wherever it was, to sort of try to get a little bit, escape that sort of one climate zone, to sort of, I was maintaining a relationship, and so through the necessity of just sort of like health stuff, but then also, going to see what is it? My time as my girlfriend is my wife now. I was always on the road, or then I was living in Mexico City, or I was, now I feel like I moved quite a bit. I was in Germany for the Leipzig thing, for Picador professorship, and now I'm back. So I feel like my schedule has always been so much in flux. I've never been able to develop a writing routine, but I always try to write whenever I can in small moments. If there's anything that binds my writing schedule, or like sort of the madness together, it would definitely be like I always write in the morning when I have the energy, and I always read before I write. sometimes it's bad because like, I have like my heroes, and those heroes tend to sort of like infiltrate the work I'm working on, and I sort of mimic the voice, and like, oh cool, like, for all that's been said about Jack Kerouac, he's so fun to read, man, and it's like that voice, and you're just like, or Larry Heineman, or Mitchell S. Jackson, or any of these other writers who, Baldwin is my favorite writer, so like, I'm blessed with the fact that I'm not as eloquent or concise as Baldwin, so I can't mimic him. But I really enjoy reading before writing, and then I get inspired and tackle the page. Then it just goes for as long as I can.
That I think that's a huge relief, because I've had people say, oh, you have to write this many times every day, and you need to do breathing exercises, and I've actually heard, like, you need to swim. Someone told me recently, if you don't swim, I think that there's a point to it, maybe having some sort of physical activity. But
physical activity is definitely, you gotta stay healthy. Yeah. What do they say? If you don't stay healthy, if you don't take time to stay healthy, you're gonna take time to stay sick. I believe that, man. I
think that's definitely true. Yeah. So I know it's a bit of a cliche question, but I really am interested in what books you're reading, what books have excited you, what books are you teaching right now, and what kind of, in a larger sense, contemporary literature are you finding most interesting right now?
Yeah, so, the books that I'm reading right now, like, I'm teaching right now Daniel Pena's The Performance of Becoming Human, which I see right there on the shelf. It's awesome. But it's all about sort of like, it's this anger sort of toward, it's a very contemporary postmodern book, but it's specifically oriented toward the writing business and the business of writing. And he talks about these sort of like career poets. Like, it's become like this career path. And I always joke that, like, writers are like the only artists who are like dying to sell out, and it's kind of sad. Yeah, it's like, oh, who's got an agent? Who's making money off this? Can I did this? Oh, this fellowship, and I get it. It's survival. But it's also sort of like we were talking earlier about the Clash, and sort of like, there was a time where like the Clash, their manager, the guy named Bernie or whatever, was like really trying to. He had this whole thing about how his vision of success was he wanted to buy a Ferrari, and how Joe Strummer really chided him for that. He was like, it's not about buying a house, it's not about buying a Ferrari, man. The Clash actively turned down like Top of the Pops, but it's because they had, this is later on in the career, had a very sort of, they were ideologically driven, and what I love about that book is that it's so ideologically driven. It's almost like burns all the bridges, but then he won a National Book Award for it. That's great irony. It is a great irony, which he was like totally brave, totally anti-careerist. It was just like, say it as it is, the unadulterated truth, and that's what I loved about that book, and that's where I teach it. It's also sort of a nice segue into sort of, it's a good grounding book too, because it teaches you that, like, there's so much sort of like smoke and mirrors and kind of mythology in the writing world, and I think when you're in the bad kind of danger as a writer is when you buy into your own mythology, as a writer, as a person, and to stay grounded, and if you're ungrounded, but it happens to a lot of writers I see where the press says one thing or reviews say one thing, and you can't, whether good or bad, you can't buy into it. You have to stay grounded in that way. So I'm reading that book. The other book I was reading, where was it at? This guy right here, La Memoria de las Cosas by Gabriela Jauregui, which is cool. I just have it right here because I'm going to do this.
I'm going to write that as well.
It's really good. I just started it. Gabriela Jauregui is a really interesting person and writer. I had the privilege of reading with her a little while back. And then I'm reading a bunch of stuff by Ray Rosa, the Guatemalan writer. Oh my God, the titles are escaping me right now. But he's got one came out, weirdly enough, because a lot of his stuff was published in New Directions really early on. But he's got one that came out with a press, like one of Amazon's presses, which is like, what?
New Directions, that's like one of my favorite presses.
They're great. Oh my God. Rainer Goetze, that one, I think is called like Aftermath or something like that. I totally butchered that title, but that's one I'm reading right now. New Directions just has so much stuff. Matthias and Ard, all Matthias and Ard stuff, that's so much fun. But yeah, who else am I reading? That's a pretty good smattering of what I'm doing right now.
In my closing question, I want to ask about your work in progress. You're working on a novel right now, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, just in a general, no spoilers kind of way, what it's about and how you're feeling about the writing process so far?
It's one of these novels that is so, I don't know if you've ever felt this, but I know already that it's going to take more skill than what I have right now as a writer.
I felt that.
Yeah,
certainly.
And so I'm trying not to rush it. Actually, I'm going to take my time with it. But it's essentially what it's about. It's about a Syrian refugee who was formerly a pilot in the Syrian Arab Air Force, which is Assad's regime, and after the Battle of Aleppo, loses his family, and sort of has this sort of like, coming to terms with what death means, right? Sort of like what I was interrogating with Dignity and Bang. I'm really exploring like the concept of death and Eastern and Western concepts of death in this new book. And so he moves to Mexico City as a refugee. His mom was Mexican, and because he has no job, he basically found out that there are all these tourists who come to Mexico City who want to see the Mexico City that doesn't exist, but that like they've created in their mind. So like Vice will go to Mexico City and create some shitty Vice documentary, and then they'll be like, "This is the real Mexico City." But people come and they want that, and so he creates this like museum of death treasures with like Santa Muerte and Nota Roja and all this, narco stuff. And people pay, and it's like Instagrammable, like heavily Instagrammable. Yeah. So they go and they basically
take selfies.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, and so what happens though is he collects a piece of what is evidence that implicates a politician in a murder, and so it essentially what happens is he's sort of this cat and mouse chase all over Mexico City where he swears he's never going to fly a plane again, but then out of necessity is evading his captors who are trying to find him by flying an antique aircraft through Mexico City and sort of all over Mexico really, but it culminates in this sort of meditation on borders and refugees and movement and space and time and that kind of stuff.
That sounds fantastic. I've got to ask. I know I said that was going to be my last question, but I know that your experience as a pilot, that previous experience as a pilot, played a role in Bang, and it seems like it's playing a role in this new book, which just made me think about a question I know has maybe divided writers and teachers on the subject of writing. How important is it to write what you know and write from experience?
I think, for me personally, what I know always complements the exploration of what I don't know, which is like kind of a weird in between answer. But I find like when I wrote Bang, I was never involved in a cartel or anything like that. But like you read enough about them where you can kind of like triangulate a lot of stuff, and then you ultimately the characters are their own people, and the setting is going to be its own thing. But I think research is integral for me. Research is integral to the writing, and so what I don't know is always grounded in what I know. But I think writing what you know is a really is a really insular way of going about the fiction world, I think, and sort of world building in general. I think reaching for the unknown with vehicle or sort of characters, the vehicle, for me that's always the best fiction, and that's always going to be the most interesting thing. And the details are interesting, but people when they come, I think it's a contract. When you walk into a novel, when you open a book, you inherently know it's fictional. I think you can get away with a lot of stuff, and I think write what you know really comes from. I think it comes from a good place, but it puts this onus, I think, on writers to make you like a journalist or something. And even though I've done like some journalism, I would never consider myself a journalist. Not out of any respect for journalists. I think I do respect journalists. I think they do amazing work all over the world. But I think ultimately, what you can do in fiction is highly sacred, and it's something that you can't do in journalism. Storytelling is above everything. The story above everything else. And I think I'll always consider myself a storyteller, not a journalist. But yeah, and then for that reason, I do both. You write with what you know, but then you write toward what you don't know.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure doing these talks. I always look forward to it. I'm probably going to come up with more excuses to interview you in the future because it's just always great hanging out.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.